1.8 Ecological questions and answers. As the questions posed above indicate, insect ecology involves the interactions of insects with each other and with other organisms and their physical environments. And, as the title of this book also suggests, we need to develop a conceptual framework in which to work, and the evidence this is based upon. Then this knowledge can be applied to understanding the ecology of natural environments and those influenced by humans, such as in agriculture, horticulture and forestry. Such understanding would contribute to solutions of problems posed in the management of landscapes, and the protection of species, communities and ecosystems. There are many fundamental questions to be addressed. How do food webs function, and how do species interact among the various trophic levels? How important are interactions within and among trophic levels? How important are the processes of intra- and interspecific competition, mutualism, amensalism, parasitism and predation in community organization? For all these within and between trophic level interactions, many questions relate to the impact of physical factors, or abiotic factors, the role of precipitation, drought, fire, climate and weather. Another interesting area of research is quantifying the genetic variation in populations and elucidating its adaptive significance. The genetic relationships among species, or their phylogenetic relationships, provide a valuable basis for asking about the comparative ecology of a species group. In relation to phylogeny, are there trends in behavior, host relationships, or population structure and dynamics? Does the phylogeny expose some evolutionary pathway involving changing ecological relationships? Are there phylogenetic constraints on the kinds of ecology we see in a lineage? Can patterns be detected? Here we have entered into the realm of evolutionary ecology, which often addresses the question, why? Why does this flower have this design? Why does that insect eat only one species of plant? Why are there so few natural enemies attacking this particular insect species? On a larger scale, ecology addresses questions about ecosystem function, landscape patterns and effects, and geographical distributions. How does nitrogen cycle in an ecosystem and what is the role of insects, above ground and below? How does increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and climate change influence ecosystem processes? How does natural vegetation affect pests in field crops? What landscape design maximizes persistence of a butterfly species? What is the richness of species on a geographical gradient such as altitude change up a mountain range, or latitude from polar regions to the tropics, and what factors influence the pattern? The answers to the questions rely on basic components of the scientific method. First, an interesting question must be asked. This provides the impetus for the money, time and energy expended in answering the question. Second, the question may be translated into a hypothesis, which provides a tentative, testable answer to the question. The hypothesis is framed in a way that allows scientific evidence to be gathered, which is either consistent with the hypothesis, or which falsifies the hypothesis. The hypothesis is either accepted or rejected based on objective, repeatable, verifiable scientific evidence. Third, observations are needed to provide data relevant to the question and the hypothesis. These observations should be extensive enough to discover a pattern in the relationship under study. The broader the pattern that is discovered, the wider will be its application and usefulness. Experiments should be employed whenever possible to help unravel the complex of interacting factors that may be observed in the field. These data result in acceptance or rejection of the hypothesis. In either case, additional research is probably needed to deepen the level of understanding and/or to extend knowledge more broadly. Fourth, once broad patterns in nature are discovered and the mechanisms driving the pattern are defined, then together they form the basis for theory, an empirically and factually based mechanistic explanation for a broad pattern in nature. This understanding can then be applied to a wide range of questions and problems relating to both natural and managed systems. Study major, broad, repeatable patterns, admonished Tillman, 1989, p. 90. Because the purpose of ecology is to understand the causes of patterns in nature, we should start by studying the largest, most general, and most repeatable patterns, Tillman, 1989, p. 90. This definition of theory differs from looser uses, such as in theoretical ecology, which often involves the study of hypotheses, and their implications for what is possible in nature. The word, theory, is also used as, just an idea, as if it is merely a hypothesis. But in this book we will use the terms hypothesis and theory as we have defined them. This is because the distinction is important, and the goal of science is the development of theory as defined above. Applications. Contributions to many disciplines. Insects cause enormous damage to human populations and on their managed lands, and they provide great benefits to humans. The costs of human suffering inflicted by insects are hard to assess, but damage to crops are more tangible. About 10,000 species of insects routinely attack our crop plants, with damage to any one crop ranging from 5 to 20% of the crop's value, and estimated total losses adding up to about $15 billion in the USA annually, Metcalf and Metcalf 1993. Insects are our tormentors, our strong competitors for food, and yet they perform important services also, e.g. Lossie and Bond 2006. Thus, the entomologist and ecologist face many challenges to gain an understanding of human relationships with insects. For entomologists, ecology may be the most central conceptual field for their science. Plant-insect interactions play significant roles in agriculture, forestry and horticulture. Insect vectoring of plant and animal diseases is very much an ecological topic. Insect physiology includes a strong environmental component. Toxicology encompasses the movement of compounds and breakdown products in food webs, and in the physical environment. Regulation of weedy species and insect pests through biological control involves the ecology of multi-trophic level systems, as does integrated pest management, which strives to maximize crop health and minimize pest problems in a cost-effective and environmentally responsible way. From these concerted and long-term efforts involving ecological aspects of entomology, many important contributions to the literature have resulted, in terms of major advancement in science, and textbooks in general ecology written by entomologists, or others that studied insects early in their careers. Price 2003b. Much conceptual ecology has been derived from studies designed to solve pressing problems. For example, the control of stored grain pests, forest insects, introduced weeds and insects, conservation and plant protection. Indeed, it is probably these urgent needs to understand insects that have made knowledge of them so important for the development of ecology. The field of ecology then contributes to, and blends with, the problem-solving areas of entomology in a continuum of interaction and advance. Every study is likely to have a useful application, and every problem solved probably contributes to a conceptual advance in ecology. Therefore, any terms, such as basic and applied science, should reflect only emphases rather than differences in disciplines. Insect ecology has benefited through the years from the free interplay between concepts and problem solving. Ecology also plays an intermediary role between such areas as conservation and agriculture. In fact, these endeavors are two sides of the same coin, with a shared heritage in decades of population and community ecological theory and experimentation. Banks 2004, p. 537. Banks goes on to explain this shared heritage in several fields of ecology and how they have been applied to agriculture. The integration of cross-disciplinary knowledge provides a great benefit to understanding natural landscapes and those influenced by humans. Insect ecology can play a major role in integrating many aspects of the environmental sciences. The following chapters expand on the theme that insect ecology has many applications to solving problems involving insects encountered by humans. Summary. This introductory chapter provides fundamentals on which the rest of the book is based. We have noted some important attributes of insect design which define the way they can relate to their environments, the basis for their ecology. These include a tough exoskeleton, a tracheal system delivering oxygen rapidly to the body, metamorphosis, flight and constraints on size. This blend of characteristics contributes to an understanding of how so many species can evolve and coexist on this planet, several million species, and a high proportion of the animal biomass in any one place. The diversity of feeding links and types, and the richness of interactions result from the diversity of insects and the richness of habitats into which they blend. This diversity is also key to understanding the extensive adaptive radiation of insect species. Insects generally occupy specialized ecological niches, particularly when living species such as plants and animals act as habitat and food. Thus interactions flow up the food web from plant species with their own specialized requirements, to insect herbivores relating to particular plant species, and carnivorous insects feeding on a relatively narrow spectrum of insect species. Biodiversity increases at each trophic level starting with a species-rich flora, to herbivores, to the predators and parasites which depend on living insects for food. With such vast resources, the opportunities to expand into new ecological niches is almost infinite. The process of this expansion involves speciation in the same locality via host shifts, or through geographic isolation. The diversity of insect species resulting from speciation and adaptive radiation means that their roles in the environment are rich, intricate and complex. Insects contribute many activities important to ecosystem function, by converting plant biomass into animal biomass, a source of food for carnivores, including both living, dying and dead plant parts. Decomposition, pollination and transmission of diseases are all included in the beneficial and deleterious impacts of insects based on our own human perspective. To understand all these ecological issues we ask questions and try to gain understanding through the scientific method, resulting in scientific hypotheses and theories. With this knowledge we can address issues relating to our management of land for plant production, our attempts at regulation of vector-borne diseases of plants and animals, and the improvement of human health and hygiene. Insect ecology plays an integral role in the development of human welfare and the conservation of our environments. Questions and discussion topics. 1. In which ways does insect flight influence their ecology? Part 2. Behavioral ecology. Contents. Chapter 2. Behavior, mating systems and sexual selection. Chapter 3. Social insects, the evolution and ecological consequences of sociality. Behavior links the organism to its environment. At every moment of the day and night, behavioral responses to environmental cues and internal drives guide an individual through its often perilous existence. Behavior determines success or failure in the efforts to reproduce. Discovering the many cues that insects use to inform them of their environment and their responses to these stimuli is an ongoing pursuit of behavioral ecologists. This is because insects can be much more specialized than humans in the cues employed to locate food and cues that stimulate feeding. Indeed, the ways in which they relate to their surroundings is often notably different from we humans. As a result, behavioral ecology is a broad and fascinating subject which reaches well beyond this section of the book, into Part 3 on species interactions and other parts of the book. We introduce behavioral ecology by concentrating on the essentials of life, those that deal with existential and environmental challenges, survival, finding food and a place to live, communicating with others of the same and different species, and reproduction. A logical progression in the book, after the introduction, is to concentrate on individuals and how they act. Then we move to interaction among species, populations and communities in later parts, expanding the scale of the ecology we consider. The second chapter in Part 2 is devoted to social insects. Their behaviors are complex and integrated into communal living, which has advanced beyond human achievements in many ways. Therefore, they generate impressive impact on their environments, including many species of plants and animals within their range. Few humans can pass their lives without encountering, for good or ill, social insects, and most people rely on pollinators such as bees for a large proportion of their food. Once we have appreciated the existence of insects at the individual and social levels, we can progress to other parts of the book, but never forgetting that the understanding of behavior is essential in the comprehension of larger-scale interactions in ecology. 2. Behavior, mating systems, and sexual selection. Behavior can be defined as anything that an individual does during its life, involving action in response to a stimulus. Eating behavior is stimulated by hunger. Sleeping or resting behavior is in response to fatigue. Escape is a response to attack, and reproductive behavior is in response to physiological urges and stimulation by members of the opposite sex. Throughout the life of an individual insect, it is behaving constantly in one way or another, making behavior a large and important subject. Many behaviors are in response to external stimuli, part of the environment, making them ecologically relevant, and behavioral ecology is an important part of ecological understanding. Understanding much of behavior results from the study of how species are adapted to the problems of survival and reproduction, and how natural selection shapes the trajectory of a lineage through the costs and benefits, the opportunities and constraints, of any particular genetic and phenotypic change in that lineage. In one of the influential early textbooks in ecology, which emphasized insects, Andrew Urtha and Birch 1954 divided analysis of the environment into weather, other animals of the same kind, other organisms of different kinds, food, and a place in which to live. Of course, any insect shows a large behavioral component involved in each of these environmental challenges, and each stage and instar of a species will experience its own kinds of problems and opportunities with individual behavioral responses. As a result, behaviors are continually changing throughout the lifespan of an insect, from its embryogenesis to its death, creating a challenge to an adequate sampling of this diversity. Added to the multitude of behaviors within individuals and species is the variety of insect and other arthropod species, each with a unique array of behaviors. Therefore, this chapter will adopt a broad approach to behavior, working through generally experienced challenges as insects pass through their life cycles: survival, foraging, where to live, communication and reproduction, and their behavioral responses to such challenges. 2.1 The reproductive imperative. The essentials of life are organization, metabolism, development, reproduction, interaction with the environment and genetic control, Hickman et al. 1988. Maintaining these essentials depends heavily on the behavior of each organism, and each is influenced by their interactions with abiotic and biotic impacts. Ecology and behavior are closely associated, hence behavioral ecology. Ultimately, the primary reason for an individual's life is to reproduce its own kind and its own genes, or to aid close relatives in achieving this end. Metabolism, development and growth depend on foraging and feeding, two components of central concern in behavioral ecology. This activity results in success or failure, with finding mates, mating and reproductive achievement often involving complex behavioral sequences, and many diverse strategies for accomplishing successful reproduction. Alternative mating strategies may even be observed within the SAMA species, as is commonly the case, e.g. Schuster and Wade 2003. Therefore, we must regard behavior, and behavioral ecology, as central to the understanding of any insect species or group of insects. 2.2 The life cycle approach. It is difficult to isolate kinds of behavior into convenient subjects because an individual insect habitually integrates stimuli into a pattern of behavior appropriate for a particular moment in its life. An insect is likely to respond simultaneously to motivations to feed, avoid predation, and to communicate. Also, communication, breeding, and avoidance of predation are probably closely associated with adult behavior. However, each major aspect of behavior justifies book-length treatments, so discrete units are treated in isolation. Here, in this chapter, we concentrate on ecological aspects of behavior, and following Alcock's 2005 example, we are guided loosely by the life history of the insect from egg to reproduction and death. Therefore, survival and feeding behavior, and habitat and microhabitat selection, are considered before communication and reproductive behavior. To be successful, all stages in the insect life cycle, from nymphs and larvae to adults, must survive, feed, and find and occupy a suitable place to live. Communication may involve the whole life of an insect, including defensive secretions against enemies and signaling to potential mates. But reproductive behavior is usually concentrated in the adult stage of the life cycle, although inevitably among insects, there are exceptions. This, then, is the order in which subjects will be treated in the chapter. Chapter 3 will consider additional aspects of behavior involving social systems and the evolution of sociality. 2.3 The experimental necessity. As in all science, experiments are essential for the objective interpretation of behavior. To understand the stimulus response, cause and effect, of a behavior, a particular stimulus must be isolated from the range of stimuli that could possibly be used. For example, when a digger wasp locates the burrow it is provisioning with caterpillars as food for its progeny, is it using its eyes to locate the burrow itself or local landmarks? Is it using olfaction, or perhaps it is orienting in relation to the sun? Early investigators realized that teasing apart the mechanisms of behavior required experiments. They became masters of this approach, and they endowed the field with a rich legacy of experimental methodology, still prominent in the field today. Amplifying on the example of the digger wasp, the famous ethologist, Nico Tinbergen 1935, Tinbergen and Crite 1938, examined the orientation behavior of the digger wasp, Philanthus triangulum Hymenoptera, Specidae, Philanthinae. Members of this subfamily provision nests in sandy soil with bees, and are called bee killer wasps, or bee wolves. After burrowing, a female spirals in flight around the nest area and then flies in search of bees. It returns and easily discovers its nest site. Tinbergen thought that the wasp must exhibit learning behavior, and the cues it oriented to were small local landmarks. Figure 2.1 illustrates the experiment he conducted. He placed a ring of pine cones around the nest while the female was therein. He allowed the female to leave and spiral around, and while she foraged he moved the pine cones a small distance from the nest. The female returned with prey for its larva and headed straight for the center of the pine cone ring. This demonstrated unequivocally that the female used the learning of landmarks as the mechanism by which it relocated its nest. Even more remarkable is the learning ability of the specid digger wasp, Ammophila pubescens, studied by Behrens 1941, which provisions many of its nests on the same day. Up to 15 nests may be provisioned every day, beginning with an inspection of each nest, which enables assessment of the size of progeny, and the number and size of caterpillar larvae needed for that day. After this initial evaluation, the female proceeds with provisioning each nest in turn with the appropriate food supply for that day. When Behrens experimentally manipulated the number or size of prey larvae after the initial inspection, the female did not change her provisioning plan originally developed. In fact, she could learn and remember each morning the amount of food required per nest for that day, and provisioned accordingly for the whole day, a remarkable feat, surpassing what most people could achieve without a notebook. Before these studies, Carl von Frisch had translated the dance language of the honeybee, starting Even more remarkable is the learning ability of the specid digger wasp, Ammophila pubescens, studied by Behrens 1941, which provisions many of its nests on the same day. Up to 15 nests may be provisioned every day, beginning with an inspection of each nest, which enables assessment of the size of progeny, and the number and size of caterpillar larvae needed for that day. After this initial evaluation, the female proceeds with provisioning each nest in turn with the appropriate food supply for that day. When Behrens experimentally manipulated the number or size of prey larvae after the initial inspection, the female did not change her provisioning plan originally developed. In fact, she could learn and remember each morning the amount of food required per nest for that day, and provisioned accordingly for the whole day, a remarkable feat, surpassing what most people could achieve without a notebook. Before these studies, Carl von Frisch had translated the dance language of the honeybee, starting in 1914, and described in von Frisch 1967, using elegant and simple experiments which demonstrated color perception by bees and their learning ability. The discussions that follow in this chapter will rely heavily on experimental methods, without necessarily describing the methodology. Therefore, you are encouraged to examine the original literature to learn of the many clever, creative ways in which behavior is investigated. 2.4 Survival. Environmental threats to survival include weather, food supply, including competition, and natural enemies, predators, parasitoids and pathogens. We now examine these threats in order, together with insect behavioral responses. 2.4.1 Weather. Presumably all organisms have evolved to cope with normal fluctuations in the local climate, and there is. Figure 2.1 An illustration of Tinbergen's experiment on the digger wasp's ability to learn landmarks, which guide the wasp to its nest. A. The wasp takes an orientation flight over its nest entrance before it goes foraging for prey, and learns to associate it with the ring of pine cones. B. The pine cones have been displaced from the nest hole. The wasp returns with prey and goes to the center of the pine cone ring. From Alcock 1975. A large literature on how particular species are adapted, for example to winter cold, long-term dry spells and excessive heat. This subject of physiological ecology is covered well in many books and journals, for example Wigglesworth's 1984 Classic Principles of Insect Physiology, Chapman's 1998 The Insects, Structure and Function, Chown and Nicholson's 2004 Insect Physiological Ecology and the journals Environmental Entomology and Physiological Entomology. In addition, more specialized treatments cover seasonal adaptations of insects, Tauber et al. 1986 The Ecology of Overwintering, Leather et al. 1993 Insect Thermoregulation, Heinrich 1981, and Dispersal and Migratory Behavior Allowing Insects to Escape Inclement Conditions, e.g. Johnson 1969, Dingle 1996. However, most adaptations to severe and threatening conditions are more physiological than behavioral, so not treated in this book. Behavioral responses to threatening conditions involve finding protected hiding places or leaving the locality. Overwintering in cold temperate and Arctic climates usually involve shitting in concealed, insulated habitats, underbark, in the soil or litter, at the forest edge or under snow. Leaving a locality to escape threats from weather definitely involves behavior, movement, probably flight, dispersal or migration. Hiding within the same habitat would involve foraging movement to find a protective place and ranging movement which explores an area for a suitable habitat, according to Dingle's 1996 classification, Table 2.1. These behaviors contrast with migration behavior, as explained next. The understanding of migration involves several areas of biology, behavior, ecology, physiology, genetics and evolution. But the definition of migration is best treated as a distinct and specialized behavior, Dingle 1996, p. 25. The behaviors include 1. Persistent movement of greater duration than occurs during the station keeping or ranging movements of the same organism. 2. Straightened out movement that differs from the relatively frequent turning that occurs during ranging and station keeping, especially the latter. 3. Initial suppression or inhibition of responses to stimuli that arrest other movements but with their subsequent enhancement. 4. Activity patterns particular to departure and arrival, and 5. Specific patterns of energy allocation to support movement. Dingle 1996, p. 25. Flight tends to be unidirectional and persistent, without orienting to local resources such as food. Flight is often preceded by adaptive changes in behavior and physiology which make flight possible, such as a photopositive response of root-feeding aphids. Likewise, a photonegative response after migration ensures that such aphids return to host plant roots. Before flight, individuals are likely to store energy as fat and suppress egg production, and after alighting egg production may proceed. The oogenesis flight syndrome, Johnson 1969, Dingle 1996. However, since flight usually precedes reproduction, and flight may even stimulate reproduction, this phenomenon is better labeled as the flight oogenesis syndrome. Thus, migration may be in one direction, or with a return journey, usually in insects by a subsequent generation, and an equivalent term in the literature is long-distance dispersal, although dispersal involves the concept of scattering or spreading out of a population. Considering the escape of insects from life-threatening weather, this qualifies as seasonal migration in Dingle's 1996 classification. But the migratory behavior also results in the opportunistic exploitation of abundant resources which develop as cold weather changes into spring and summer in cold temperate latitudes. Migration can be both an escape from winter and a plunge into the exuberance of plant growth in the summer. It may also include a bet hedging strategy in which progeny from one female spread out and experience new and different environmental conditions. Holland et al. 2006. The migration of the monarch butterfly, Danaus plexippus, will be familiar to many. Figure 2.2. Large aggregations of adult butterflies overwinter in fir tree forests in a mountain range in central Mexico. In the spring they migrate to the north and east, colonizing the southern United States. Figure 2.2a. Subsequent generations move northwards into cooler states in the summer. Additional overwintering populations are found in California, which spread east and north in the spring and summer. The monarch butterflies oviposit on milkweeds, Asclepias, some species of which e.g. A syriaca. Table 2.1a Glossary of behaviors involving movement of individuals through space. Movements characteristics examples movements within the home range are directed to resources. Stasis individual is stationary resting stages of insects, diapause etc. Station keeping individual stays within home range, an area required to provide the resources for survival and reproduction. Local movement to food, shelter, mates etc. Kinesis changes in rate of movement or turning. An insect responding to an attractive pheromone or chiromone. Foraging the search for food or other resources, stopping when resource is discovered. A parasitoid searching for hosts, or a butterfly searching for a host plant. Commuting regular foraging on a short-term basis which ends when resource is found. Ant foraging, bee or wasp provisioning behavior. Territoriality guarding of an area against intruders, and aggressive behavior against trespassers. Mating territories of dragonflies or butterflies where resident males drive off intruding conspecific males. Ranging exploration of an area beyond the home range, ending when suitable. Resources are discovered. Dispersal from one habitat to another such as from feeding to overwintering sites. Movement independent of resources or home range. Migration undistracted movement with stimulus to end provided by movement itself. Annual movement of monarch butterflies, coccinellids, noctuids, aphids, to and from wintering sites. Movement not under control of individual. Accidental displacement passive movement by wind, water or thermals. Small insects such as aphids carried by wind. From H. Dingle, 1996. Migration, The Biology of Life on the Move. Reprinted by permission of Oxford University Press, Inc. It may also include a bet hedging strategy in which progeny from one female spread out and experience new and different environmental conditions. Holland et al. 2006. The migration of the nutrition, an animal well defended. These kinds of machinations between members of interacting trophic levels are discussed in Chapter 4 on plant-herbivore interactions, Chapter 7 on prey and predator interactions, and Chapter 8 on host and parasite interactions. In addition, lateral effects, such as competition, which reduces access to resources, and the probability of survival, are treated in Chapter 5 on lateral interactions. 2.5 Foraging behavior. Foraging involves searching for food, and feeding results after a food item has been discovered and accepted as a suitable plant part, prey item or host of a parasitoid. The process appears to be simple enough for humans, but for small insects with specialized diets, and a complex environment in which to search, the adaptations that overcome such challenges become complex. This point is illustrated by the path of behavioral decisions made by a parasitoid from finding an appropriate habitat to host acceptance and oviposition, and manipulation of the host. While some specifics are provided here, the scheme of decision-making resulting in the narrowing of the field of search may be generalized to the sequence of behaviors that the majority of insects must pass through in order to find food. This is the case whether an individual is finding food for itself or for its progeny. One of the most thoroughly studied species regarding foraging behavior is the parasitoid, Cardiochilus nigriceps, Hymenoptera. Braconidae, which uses as a host the tobacco budworm, Heliothis virescens, Lepidoptera, Noctuidae. The species has been studied over many years in Vinson's research group, with a detailed flowchart of interactions resulting, as shown in Figure 2.3, Vinson 1975, de Morais et al. 1998, de Morais and Lewis 1999. The remarkable number of behaviors involved in the progression from finding a suitable habitat in which to search, to finding a host and accepting it, and ovipositing in the host, is well illustrated in the figure. First, females must locate a suitable habitat, one in which the host is likely to be found, and they are attracted to brightly lit, open areas in which tobacco plants may be growing. Once in the habitat, 2, females search for host plants, 3, and examine them for damage, 4. They land on plants that are damaged by tobacco budworm larvae in response to a host-seeking stimulant 5. This chemical, a mixture of 3-methyltriocontanes, originates in the mandibular gland of the host caterpillar, which then becomes deposited on leaf surfaces as the caterpillar feeds. The parasitoid, on detecting this compound, 6, starts actively searching the leaf surface, with antennae pressed against the leaf. She follows the path off the compound until she finds a host. 7. The mandibular gland secretion that provides an adaptive advantage to the receiving parasitoid, but is produced by the individual the parasitoid is searching for, is called a chiromone. See Table 2.3.